Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going on an absolutely wild journey that bridges two completely different worlds. We're going to start at the incredibly microscopic, invisible borders of a single human cell. And then we're going to zoom all the way out to the macroscopic, life-sustaining power of your own lungs. The actual mechanics of how you stay alive from one second to the next are just a literal marvel of biological engineering. And honestly, by the time we wrap this up, you're going to look at every single breath you take in a completely new light.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever actually stopped to think about the sheer logistics of breathing? Like, when you take a deep breath in, that oxygen doesn't just hang out in your chest. It has to be distributed to trillions, yes, trillions of individual cells all over your body. And every single one of those cells is aggressively demanding oxygen to survive, while simultaneously producing carbon dioxide waste. So how on earth does biology manage a massive supply chain problem like that?
Well, here's our roadmap to figure that out. We'll start at number 1, the cell's security gate, move to going with the flow, and then powering up active transport. After that, we'll zoom out to the gas exchange problem, explore the human respiratory system, and finally wrap up with when breathing goes wrong.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the cell security gate.
Before oxygen or any nutrients can actually do anything useful for you, they have to physically get inside the cell. But obviously, a cell can't just leave its front door wide open, right? It needs to let the good stuff in while keeping toxic substances locked out. Science calls this highly intelligent security gate the cell membrane, and our best way of understanding it is through something called the Fluid Mosaic Model. Think of the boundary of your cells not as a solid brick wall, but more like a microscopic sea of fats. And floating around in this oily sea, kind of like icebergs, are all these different proteins. It's totally dynamic, constantly shifting around, and it acts as the ultimate biological border crossing.
Now, what's really fascinating about the structure of these fats, which we call phospholipids, is how they arrange themselves into a double layer. You can see how the round parts on the outside, the heads, are hydrophilic. That basically means they love water, so they're totally happy facing the watery environments on the inside and outside of the cell. But those little tails pointing inward, they're hydrophobic. They completely hate water. By hiding safely on the inside away from any fluid, they create this incredibly effective, waterproof barrier that regulates exactly what gets to pass through.
Which brings us to section 2, going with the flow.
So things do need to pass through eventually. And sometimes a cell gets really lucky and substances can cross the secure border without the cell spending a single drop of its own energy. We call this passive transport, and it basically has two main VIP lanes. First, there's simple diffusion. This is for the tiny, often fat-soluble molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide. They literally just slip right through those hydrophobic tails down their concentration gradient, so going from an area of high concentration to low. But what about the bigger stuff, or molecules with an electrical charge? They still want to flow downhill from high to low, but that lipid barrier is in the way. That's where facilitated diffusion comes in. Remember those protein icebergs we talked about? They act as these super-specific channels, basically little helpers that ferry those bigger molecules across the sea of fat, totally free of charge.
Now, you really can't talk about diffusion without talking about water. The diffusion of water is so important it actually gets its own special name, osmosis. This is the movement of free water molecules down a water potential gradient. And let me tell you, keeping this osmotic balance in check, it's not just some casual cellular chore. It is an absolute, non-negotiable matter of life and death for every single cell in your body.
To put that into perspective, just think of our animal cells as these incredibly fragile little balloons filled with jelly. If you drop a cell into a hypotonic solution, which just means there's a way higher concentration of water outside than inside, water is going to frantically rush in. The cell swells up, and boom, it pops like an overfilled water balloon. It's a mess, and it's definitely fatal. On the flip side, in a hypertonic solution, where the water all rushes out, the cell just completely dehydrates and shrivels up into a little raisin. In either scenario, the cell dies. So yeah, the flow of water literally dictates survival.
Let's move on to section 3, powering up active transport. But nature isn't always that accommodating. What if a cell desperately needs to move a substance against that natural tide? Like pulling something from an area of low concentration into an area that's already highly concentrated. Well, you can't just lazily float down the river anymore. Now you have to paddle upstream. And that requires energy. This whole process is called active transport. And here's how it plays out. First, your target molecule binds to a very specific carrier protein in the membrane. Next, the cell has to pay up. It spends its biological energy currency, a molecule called ATP. The ATP breaks down, releasing energy, and that energy physically forces the carrier protein to change its shape, mechanically pushing the molecule across to the other side. It's exactly like a microscopic ferry, and ATP is the fuel making it all happen.
All right, scaling things up in Section 4, the gas exchange problem.
So at this point, we've pretty much mastered how one single cell breathes and eats. But when you zoom out from a single cell to an entire human being, you run straight into a massive, life-threatening geometry problem. It's all about the surface area to volume ratio. Think of a tiny single-celled amoeba. It has this huge surface area compared to its microscopic volume. Oxygen can just diffuse straight across its membrane and instantly reach everywhere it needs to go inside. But you're a large, complex animal. Your internal volume is massive, but your external surface area, your skin, is actually relatively small. You've got a really low surface area to volume ratio. If you relied purely on oxygen just diffusing through your skin, the cells deep inside your heart or your brain would suffocate long before that oxygen ever reached them.
This pretty harsh biological reality is governed by something called Fick's law of diffusion. Fick's law basically states that the speed at which a substance diffuses is determined by multiplying your surface area by the concentration difference and then dividing all of that by the thickness of the exchange membrane. So what does this all mean? Well, if you want a massive rate of diffusion to keep a human alive, nature's math requires two strict things. You absolutely must evolve an astronomically large surface area, and the barrier the oxygen crosses has to be razor thin.
Let's look at the incredible solution to this in Section 5. The human respiratory system.
So, how exactly did evolution solve Fick's law for us? By designing an absolute internal masterpiece, the mammalian lung. Every time you breathe in, air travels down your trachea, splits into your bronchi, and dives deeper and deeper into these tiny tubes until it hits the alveoli. The alveoli are these microscopic little air sacs, and you have millions of them packed into your lungs. Because they're so incredibly small and there are just so many of them, they collectively create an absolutely enormous surface area. Seriously, if you were to flatten out all the alveoli inside your chest right now, they would cover roughly half the size of a tennis court. And the best part? Their walls are only a single cell thick. Massive surface area, microscopic thickness, Fick's law is perfectly satisfied.
But to keep that concentration gradient nice and steep, we have to constantly refresh the air in that internal tennis court. This is ventilation, or, breathing. When you inhale, your diaphragm, which is that sheet of muscle right under your lungs, actively contracts and flattens out. This physically expands the volume of your chest cavity, making the internal pressure drop, which basically vacuums the higher pressure outside air straight into your lungs. And when you exhale, it's mostly just passive. Your diaphragm relaxes back up into a dome shape, your chest volume shrinks, pressure goes up, and the waste air gets pushed right out. It's literally a physics engine running completely subconsciously inside your ribcage every second of the day. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, when breathing goes wrong.
As perfectly adapted and elegant as this system is, it faces modern challenges that millions of years of evolution literally could not have prepared for. Now, our lungs do have built-in protections, right? We produce sticky mucus to trap dirt, and we have these tiny, sweeping, hair-like structures called cilia that constantly push that nasty mucus up and out of our airways. But environmental stressors can totally overwhelm those defenses. Take an asthma attack, for example. The airways themselves actually constrict, severely choking off the airflow. Plus, airborne pathogens and fine dust can easily slip past those sweeping cilia. Rapid industrialization has pumped out massive amounts of fine particulate matter, like PM10. And PM10 is so incredibly small that it travels right past all our defenses, deep into those delicate one-cell-thick alveoli we were just talking about.
To really understand the severity of this, we just have to look at the numbers. Research published in a major medical journal examined the direct link between environmental air pollution and respiratory disease, and the findings are stark. The data indicates, quote, that a 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in PM10 is associated with an increase in mortality of 0.6% in daily all-natural cause mortality in major cities in India and China. That's a highly documented, real-world reality showing the undeniable link between the air quality of our cities and severe respiratory distress. Which really leaves us with a profound thought to wrap things up. We started today looking at the sheer microscopic wonder of a single-cell membrane, and we scaled all the way up to the incredible biological engineering of the human lung, a system meticulously perfected by evolution to balance out Fick's law and keep trillions of your cells alive.
But as our environment changes faster than ever, flooding the air with new industrial pollutants and fine particulates, how will this ancient evolutionary design adapt to the air we are breathing right now? It's a massive question about our biology, our environment, and ultimately our future. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep marveling at the incredible science happening inside you with every single breath you take.